Because there's quite a bit to talk about in regards to a state of play. Chances are us talking about this has meant that it's been announced, because that usually happens anyway. We have a state of play coming very soon. However, the anticipation around it has been tanked quite considerably by Jeff Grubb over on Twitter, saying in response to Hazardor Gaming, I don't really expect much, if anything, of first party from Sony. So we're going to talk about some different predictions. We're going to talk about some different things that in theory might be at the show. But thoughts going in that we're not really going to get first party stuff?
Scott, a few weeks ago with Ewan, before the PS5 Pro was announced, all three of us did our predictions for a potential state of play or potential showcase, as we were hoping it would be coming towards the end of the year. And looking back, I think, how foolish were we? Because everything we have learned since then has pointed towards this being a very low-key affair. And while I know Grubb mentioned that it's just kind of his assumption that there'll be very little, if any, first-party involvement, I think I'm not expecting much. I'm not expecting much outside the way of studios that we know and love announcing remasters of their work, or maybe at best DLC additions to recently released games. I think Sony's just kind of happy to sit this year out in terms of big showcases, launch the PS5 Pro, release the few second-party games that they still have to come, and then hopefully we get something bigger towards the end of the year or into next year. I don't know, like everyone I've talked to, state of players I don't think have great reputations anyway. Like a lot of times we come out disappointed by them, but no one I've really talked to in comparison to previous events I even seemed like optimistic that we could get something good this time, which is kind of a strange place to be in.
Well, let's touch on some stuff. We'll run some things down because chances are there's going to be some remasters there, one of them being Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn remaster was recently rated by the ESRB, so that thing seems like it's imminent. Also, a Days Gone remaster. We talked about it on last week's podcast, but a Days Gone remaster has been mentioned by various insiders over on social media, just saying initially that there was another remaster that Sony had cooking, and apparently that's been revealed to be Days Gone, but there hasn't been any follow-up on that just yet. Also, in regards to DLC, and I'll get to the second one of these in a bit, but I think there'll be Stellar Blade DLC there. And we have had developers shift up, say that the game sold extremely well. They had various plans for DLC across the rest of 2024, and then wider franchise plans across 2025. The game did so extremely well that they started thinking about other things they could do with the Stellar Blade IP. But from the developers, there's been mention of a boss rush mode, and there's also been mention of a photo mode, but then they haven't followed up on that. Since the game's launch, there's been some new costumes for Eve, but that's been about it. So I think because of how well Stellar Blade did and its association with PlayStation, you can kind of just lean on that. But thoughts on the remaster stuff? The Horizon and Days Gone is a weird combo.
Yeah, so like you said, we talked about this a little bit last week, and honestly, kind of call me a shill or whatever it is. I don't mind that these things are happening, man. Like, do I think it's necessary? No. Do I think like everyone's going to be over the moon to see these games, especially Zero Dawn, get remastered? Not necessarily, but I'm very much in the camp of why not. I know in the case of Zero Dawn, as you nicely put last week, Horizon is one of their biggest franchises, right? We got Forbidden West, we got DLC for that game. They're making a live-action spin-off for Netflix, so why not have Zero Dawn playable in a kind of up-res state alongside Forbidden West, if it is one of their big franchises, kind of like how they've established themselves with The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2 remastered, where you have essentially direct parity across both of those games. I think it is interesting with Zero Dawn because that thing, one, is still beautiful if you play it on a PS5 and still plays silky smooth. Like, going back to that thing before playing Forbidden West, I couldn't believe how well that thing still played. And it has had patches, obviously, since with the PS4 Pro and with the PS5 launching as well. Honestly, Days Gone is the one that I'm here for. I know that game completely broke me when it first came out. It was way too long for its own good, but in comparison to Zero Dawn, I think that's the game that can really benefit from a remaster.
Totally
had a lot of ambitious ideas for the time, released notoriously buggy back in 2017 or whenever it was it came out. The idea of filling zombies, 18, yeah, sorry. the idea of filling like freakers up on the screen and just, getting more bodies in on that side of things. I think that hopefully will be harnessed by the PlayStation 5 Pro. It is a bit of an underrated gem. It's definitely not perfect, but I think if you're going to remaster everything else from that era, why not do Days Gone as well? I think it's slightly different in that, nothing else seems to be happening with that franchise. Like, Deacon St. John turned up an Astrobot, but it's already been pretty much confirmed that they're not doing a Days Gone 2, so it's an odd one to bring back in that respects. But again, I think it's another case of, well, why not? We need stuff to release alongside the PlayStation 5 Pro, and if I was a betting man, which I'm not because I always lose, I would put my bets on both of those remasters coming out either the day of or the week of the PS5 Pro's release, just to have something to be like, look, they're not brand new games, but these have been remastered with the new console in mind, and hopefully we'll take advantage of it in that regard.
There's something so low-key psychotic about promoting the PS5 Pro with Days Gone. And I'm with you. Like, I enjoyed that game enough. I think it's a good cult classic. I think a lot of people have way fonder memories of it than was the discourse at the time. That game was dogged by, its review build needed a day one patch. There was a whole thing about the version that went out for a lot of reviews was then touched up on day one, but then not that many outlets re-reviewed it. Not that it is some, 4 or 5 star gem, but there is a lot to like about it. And I would rather overall as a mentality, I would rather you pick flawed gems and try to shine them up than just take something that Horizon Zero Dawn just does not need the update. Both games do run at 4K 60 because I guess they're the PS4 versions on PS5, and they've been patched anyway. So if you're going to go back to it, you've got to do something more substantial to it. And like you said, maybe that is just tweaking the crowd tech and then doing another advert showing that many zombie freakers coming at Deacon all at once kind of thing. But what a weird, never in a million years would I have predicted this timeline.
You know what's interesting? I was looking at, just separately, I don't even think we'll talk about it here, but I was looking at the PC sales for PlayStation games that have come to PC, and while a lot of the big hitters and the best-selling ones are the ones you'd expect, like God of War, like quite far up the list is Days Gone. It's sold like an estimated 1.7 million copies, which is quite a lot for PC, so this thing has had a nice tail on it, and I think we forget just how many copies it did sell at the time. Like, it wasn't critically revered and was apparently still viewed as somewhat of a disappointment internally, but if you look at the sales figures, it was strong. It wasn't like it came out and was, again, as I mentioned last week, like an Order 1886, or certainly not a Concord level disappointment. Like, sales-wise, people were buying this thing up, and apparently from the PC sales continue to do so now. So internally, it might just make business sense in that regard, where we can laugh, but if people are still buying it, then why not?
Some of it is as super simple as just there is always a massive amount of people who love zombie games, and if Last of Us, they've had Last of Us factions lined up until they cancelled it, so it's like, okay, what else have we got? We're not going to have Last of Us Part 3 for a while. There was potentially a world where we had a tandem approach to zombie stuff, Last of Us and Days Gone, and just tag them out. And because Last of Us is a bit like, they're waiting to see what they're going to do, or it's going to be a while before we see it, you almost might as well tap back into that. Like, there's a reason Walking Dead has multiple spin-offs, including the main show. There is such a want for zombie media. And I know that that was a whole thing towards the end of the 2000s, early 2010s. They were everywhere. But it's not like those fan bases went away. So in a way, it makes sense. It's just that none of us would ever have seen it coming.
And you know what, as well, I think it is a sort of case of, we can say, who wants this, who needs it, but it is sort of a case of voting with your wallets to a certain extent. I mean, they keep making remasters because remasters sell. The Last of Us Part 2 remaster sold like gangbusters towards the start of the year, and a lot of that might just be people upgrading, but even if it's people upgrading, it's essentially, in that sense, extra money for Sony because it's someone who's bought the game once already, and then they're essentially giving them a microtransaction to get a better version of it, right? So if it's the only reason I'd be hesitant in not even championing these remasters, but being okay with them, is if they were taking resources away from other things that I think are more deserving of remasters, like Bloodborne, of course, or even like other smaller titles or other second-party titles. But I don't even know if that's the case, because how many times have we heard stories about developers who kind of, when they're working on a new project or they're starting a new project, kind of have nothing to do. So oftentimes, like, these remasters, whether they're outsourced or done internally, are kind of given to artists or developers who maybe aren't currently needed on the next big project that studio's working on because it's not at that part of the development process. I don't know.
Yeah, that was mentioned in regards to Naughty Dog and Last of Us, and like trying to that was why they ended up doing Last of Us Part 1 remake or whatever. But yeah, I definitely I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that it's that you might as well have these things, but I think if the game's already run 4K 60, you need to do something else to justify the price tag. But then also the price tag is a variable because Sony experimented with the $10 upgrade stuff, £10 upgrade stuff for Death Stranding, and so I'm curious where it lands. Like it's like do people pay $10 for an upgraded Days Gone? Like, that's a really weird thing. Or do they pay $30, $40 for, like, more of an overhaul? Like, have Sony Bend been able to dedicate a portion of their time to doing something more substantial with this? I don't know. But in regards to DLC, I mentioned Stellar Blade before, but also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is likely getting DLC as well. Square, Final Fantasy VII Remake back in 2020 did get the intermission DLC 1 year later because it was then PlayStation 5 exclusive. So because you had the PlayStation 5 available, Square Enix might as well get on top of that. Final Fantasy 16, Square Enix initially said they weren't focused on DLC, but then they did do 2 DLCs for the game. And they're not critical to the story, but they are kind of fundamental. Like, they do slot in quite nicely to the way that game was structured. So it kind of feels like they were always going to do something with it. And Rebirth so far has been used to demo the PlayStation 5 Pro the most. It's what Digital Foundry were given access to. And so it makes sense to then do a PlayStation 5 Pro, maybe exclusive, maybe not, expansion of Rebirth as a bridge to the next one. I'm curious what that is. I feel like there's only a couple of characters left to plug into the main story. They tease Vincent and Sid at the end of you show them at the across Rebirth, and they're the only 2 characters that aren't playable. So maybe they do like they did with Yuffie, and you get I mean, to be honest, fans, including me, would love a Vincent-centric spin-off. If you just do a couple of hours with Vincent or whatever, you maybe do something with him because he is kind of activated. He is part of the gang, like he's out there. I don't know what you would do unless you want to do, only fans know what I'm talking about. The stuff with Lucretia, you could maybe do that as a separate thing. But still, it feels like that's something that Square Enix might want to do.
I'm tapping my fingers together mischievously at that comment that you've made there, Scott, because as you know, and as people listening to this probably know as well, I don't know much about Final Fantasy VII. I love the remake games, and I'm enjoying the journey, but I have no idea what they could do with DLC because I have no idea where the story is going, you know what I mean?
Right.
But judging on what we already got with Rebirth, Vincent was by far the most interesting character that I thought they didn't do much with. And obviously, I imagine he's going to take on a bigger role in the third part. But if they can get me, maybe not. I know you.
Well, he was always optional in the original, so it's like if they want to flesh him out, it's they need to choose to do more.
Was Yuffie optional in the original as well?
Yes.
Maybe then, if they do something similar this time around and give him his own DLC, along with Sid, like you mentioned, I would definitely be up for that. That would intrigue me, because I almost bought bloody Dirge of Cerberus just to see what his crack was about after playing
Don't
Rebirth.
Do that.
No. Everyone said, Josh, stop, you'll have another mental breakdown. But I think it makes sense for them to do more Final Fantasy. Just generally, like you said, all the previous recent games have all had DLC, and we've been seeing it so much in, for instance, the Digital Foundry breakdown of what the PS5 Pro can do. So it might be a bit too soon, but I think if we're going to get a Pro version of the game, which seems completely set in stone for this year, then why not announce a DLC to tide us over until we get the third part? Because it seems like, honestly, DLC might be the last sort of product we get from Square Enix as we knew them across the past few years, because across 2024, they have been saying about them pivoting in terms of their approach to making Final Fantasy and who they're partnered with. So maybe by the time, the third part comes around, that might be a multi-platform game. They might not have these close ties with Sony. They might not be working on the PlayStation 6 version of it that we don't know about later on down the line. I don't know.
Part of those conversations have been them ostensibly saying that the exclusivity deals have not worked out, that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy 16 came in under expectations, which Square does say about everything. I imagine their financial analyst has breakfast in the morning and says, this has come in under my own expectations, because dude seems to say it for everything. But still, without them revealing the specific statistics, they are out there saying that they could have done better kind of thing, and multi-platform would be the way to go with that. However, I have to assume that if there is a DLC in the works, it would have been in the works for a good sort of year or 2 years or whatever, alongside Rebirth, as something to spin off. So I agree, like this could be the last thing that you do, and then you have to start operating a bit more intelligently or a bit more multi-platform to recoup the astronomical budgets that are being applied to these games. So it does make sense to go multi-plat eventually, but it's just a weird thing because you've got a Square Enix that are very associated with PlayStation. They do a lot of exclusive content. They weren't part of Astrobot, which is weird. There's Cloud wasn't in there, Sephiroth wasn't in there, even though the association with the original system is massive. And so I don't know why that was the case. Like, they're sort of one of the biggest champions of Sony and exclusivity and whatever. And then they just sort of dip and go like, well, actually, we're not going to be part of this, and everything came in under expectation, and we're going to change things going forward. So I wonder if that relationship is changing anyway.
It's extremely odd behavior, isn't it? It's, yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I definitely get the sense that they're almost kind of blaming Sony for these coming in under expectations, even though they, they've made this mistake, if you can call it a mistake, before. Like, they signed the exclusivity deal with Xbox for Rise of the Tomb Raider, then that came in under expectations, so they said, okay, we're not going to do that again, and now they've done it for the past few Final Fantasy games, and they're going, we're not going to do that again. It's like, guys, you keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again, just with different companies and with different franchises, it seems. But yeah, the Astrobot mission was very odd, to say the least. I don't know why there wasn't, like you said, at least Cloud in there or something.
Well, Cloud's sword is in the 2021.
Yes.
Like, you can find his sword, but then for whatever reason they were just like, nothing. Take it out. We want less to do with this, which is really weird.
I do want to circle back to what you said about Stellar Blade as well, if you'll permit me, because I would love some Stellar Blade DLC, Scott, and I think that is another game that would really benefit from a PlayStation 5 Pro version, because that thing is absolutely gorgeous. It is gorgeous. It looks and runs pretty damn well on the base PS5, and I would love to see what they could do with that boost in technology. I think the issue with it is that I don't know how substantial a DLC would be without giving away too many spoilers. The end kind of sets up a sequel more than it does a DLC, but maybe they do like an interim thing or like a missing story or a few, or maybe just focus on something small like the boss rush one that they've already mentioned. But I think, judging from the success of that game, I think it would be a mistake to not do a re-release of some kind with extra content and more bells and whistles for the PlayStation, especially with it being that timed exclusive.
Yeah, man. I think there's rumors of, I think it's Raven is the character that you could maybe do a spin-off for, the person who was originally on the planet before you arrived there.
Yeah.
Because you kind of get bits and pieces of her moveset across the game anyway, so it seems like some of the dev work's already been done for that. In terms of other things, you mentioned Death Stranding 2 in our notes, the idea of them doing like a full cinematic trailer, maybe give us the release date, and then they also need to satisfy the Tokyo Game Show crowd as well, so maybe there's a more gameplay-focused presentation over there, but it's probably worth reminding people that Death Stranding 2 is out next year, or seems like it'll be out next year.
Listen, right, I'm feeling a little frisky today while we record this. I'm feeling a little good about myself, and I'm going to make a claim right now. Death Stranding is one of the best games ever made, Scott Tilford. It is unreal. I cannot believe the tale that thing's had.
He's on the sauce.
How much it resonated with me. I haven't even started drinking yet. It's only 25 past 12. But I was watching the old trailers before we started recording this. I was looking into interviews that Kojima has done recently. We know it's going to be a TGS. I think my headcanon is that it will also be at the State of Play, maybe a short story-driven trailer and then a release date, and then the full gameplay blowout and a bigger look at it at TGS in a few days. Because this is like their one big game for 2025. I know the Wolverine is penciled in for them, but we don't know if that's going to get delayed till 2026 or what's really going on with that. So I know it's second party, and I know Death Stranding isn't, as big a hitter as the likes of the Horizon or The Last of Us or Uncharted or whatever, but it's still a game that has a dedicated fan base. And yeah, I even put on the low raw soundtrack before recording this and thought, you know what, when this game is announced and it has like a release date and its versions go up for pre-order, it might be the first collector's edition I ever buy, Scott, because I cannot wait for it.
I think it depends what they do with it. Excuse me, in terms of it taking up a big portion of a State of Play, I think because Death Stranding is a really weird game to demo. Like, in the run up to it, me and you literally did a video, would have been back in 2017, 2018, called WTF is Death Stranding, because they kept that under wraps until we got our hands on it. And so now that everybody knows what it is, I think it's interesting, or it was interesting, looking at the game's sales across those first few months, where it shot. I don't think it ever claimed number one, but it got to quite near the top of the charts. And then by the time you got to week 2 and 3, it dropped right off. It went all the way back down to like number 30, number 40, at least in the UK charts. And that was kind of indicative of, I don't know, like it is a bit more niche. Like it was Kojima talking about a new Strand genre. For the people it clicked with, it clicked massively. And me and you've talked about how incredibly addictive it is. And it is a great series of gameplay loops. And I wonder about getting that, front and center kind of thing. I think it fits the TGS audience more than the state of play, who are expecting like the next Naughty Dog game or something like that. So I'm curious, but it's worth reminding people that it exists. And it's like in the modern industry, getting something as authored as this by an author like Kojima is rare. There's nothing like that at all, really.
That's
so it's
it.
like to have Kojima present it or something would be cool.
And I think, obviously, like you said, it's a hard game to demo because so much of it is walking and tripping over your own feet and falling on your ass and losing all of your parcels, right? But I mean, what Kojima does best is like those cinematic story trailers that kind of throw a load of images at you that do not make any sense at all, but keeps us talking forever. And we haven't had one of those in a while. I still want to know what the hell is going on with old graying Sam Bridges. Not Norman Reedus' character from the first game that we saw.
There's also Troy Baker's electric guitar, man.
Troy Baker's electric guitar. What's going on with Dakota Fannin? Like, what's happening with Fragile? There's so many questions in that regard, and I think if you're a Kojima fan, you like that. I mean, honestly, it's almost a miracle that I love Death Stranding 1 as much as I did, because the promise of those trailers were just ridiculous, right? The way we were on tenterhooks for years for every new bit of information. Like you said, what is it even going to play like? How can it possibly live up to the games, the game that we've imagined it being in our head? And arguably it didn't. But now, I think it has that at least going for it. We know what Death Stranding is finally. We know how it plays. So in that sense, hopefully it's more warmly received, because we haven't had that ability to think of it as maybe the next MGS or the next evolution in action stealth or whatever. We know it's a Strand game, like you mentioned. We know it's kind of an adventure game more than anything else.
And we know that the next MGS or whatever the hell Fizzant is, like we know that's coming as well. So it's like this can kind of embrace its weirdness and quirkiness and be the weird little Kojima project. I mean, I imagine at the beginning he didn't plan a Death Stranding 2 anyway. I think he's been out there talking about how it wasn't initially the plan. But we'll see. But yeah, in terms of other stuff, chances are we'll get Astrobot DLC. They've already mentioned that's coming, and it's a nice goodwill tag on from how well the game's been doing. There's potential of Wolverine, and there's potential of Silent Hill 2. I feel like Silent Hill 2 is the obvious one because that game is console exclusive, and this will be the last state of play or the last big marketing push before the game comes out itself. But closing thoughts on the whole thing, I'll be amazed if we come out of it with wide smiles. I think we'll come out of it going like, okay, cool.
Yes.
You got some stuff. Hardly any of this is going to come true, is what I'm saying.
Well, I think, I know. I feel like it's indicative that our predictions have mostly been like DLC, remasters, because that's kind of what we've been trained to expect from Sony, and even then they might not deliver on those. I think they're in a very strange position, and I have been laughing at all of the memes over the past week about the roller coaster that we're currently on with this company of being so back and then everything being in the dirt again, and then we're being so back, and who knows where state of play is going to come on that. Like, is it going to be another win, or is it going to be another reason why we kind of think they're a bit rudderless at the moment? I hope they have something big. I hope they have one big surprise that we don't know about. I still go backwards and forwards on whether they'll maybe announce the Venom standalone game here.
I was thinking that,
or whether that'll be closer to the end of the year, maybe at the Game Awards. I think the Game Awards is almost certainly more likely, and that gives you something else to look forward to for 2025. But it will be disappointing if all this state of play is Silent Hill and the remasters. I think while we expect that, and that's fine, when you haven't had a showcase all year, and when you've had the past few months that Sony has had PR-wise with the likes of Concord, with the likes of the PlayStation 5 Pro's price point, is it too late to stop this, or is it just how long you think they've had this planned for ages, right? So maybe they're just going to kind of maybe take the hit on it being a little bit disappointing and then build on it from there on out. But you just can never tell with this company these days, man.
No, I'm going in expecting it to feel like they are as nakedly figuring out what the hell Sony even is as it currently feels right now. Like you post canceling Last of Us, Concord not doing very well. It just seems like they could really do with a win, but I don't think hardly any of their main studios, Naughty Dog, Insomniac, Sucker Punch, maybe Sucker Punch with Ghost of Tsushima too. I don't think they are ready to show things just yet because they weren't expected to be showing things yet. They were supposed to be riding high on a sea of live service titles. And so that's another thing is that we might just get a Fair Games update or something.
Yeah.
Like, you've got, they still need to try and address all that. Like it's never part of our predictions because it's the most boring part of their slate. But they still have Marathon, they still have Fair Games. Like there's still another 2 or 3 live service games that were meant to be in that slate, but it's no one wants that stuff, so yeah.
I think like they have been all year, in my opinion, really successfully. I think they're just going to lean on those second-party deals they've made. In my head, it might not be at the state of play. It's probably more of a TGS thing, considering that these are Japan-based studios, but we might get a Metal Gear Delta release date, and maybe they'll tie, Sony will get some promotion with that. Silent Hill 2, of course, like you said. There's been rumors that Resi 9 is ready to announce. Maybe that's a TGS. I think that's maybe, again, wishful thinking. That's probably more towards the end of the year at the Game Awards. But like maybe they're just relying on those. I'm not saying all of those are going to be exclusive, but just to say, hey, you can play all of these on PlayStation at some point. Here's why you shouldn't regret getting a PS5 because, yeah, they're multi-platform, but hey, we might have PS5 Pro versions. Who knows?
We still care, guys.